I couldn't be more excited to have this particular group of people. We have, of course, my colleague Alfred Gardner, who works hard every day to help manufacturers be more efficient using HR technology and tools and resources. We have Beth Eno, who is an HR manager at Cascade, and Brandon Haddock, who leads communications for Textron Specialized. And I'm going to kick it off to them to ask them to introduce themselves briefly and tell us a little bit about their work. And I'll have Alfred start.
Good afternoon. My name is Alfred Gardner, and I'm with Georgia MEP, and my role in the organization is to provide HR services to small to medium-sized manufacturers as an HR consultant.
Thanks, Alfred. Beth, you're up next.
Hi, everyone. My name is Beth. I'm the Human Resource Manager at Cascade Corporation for our Warner Robins location. Cascade manufactures forklift attachments in the material handling industry, and our facility specifically serves the OEM market for the U.S. making forklifts.
Thanks, Beth. Lastly, Brandon.
Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Brandon Haddock. I'm the Director of Communications for Textron Specialized Vehicles. We are headquartered in Augusta, Georgia, where we manufacture E-Z-GO golf cars and Cushman utility vehicles. We also have a facility in Cartersville, Georgia, where we manufacture aviation ground support equipment, and very excited to be here today.
Thanks, Brandon. The reason I'm particularly excited about talking to the three of you together is because beyond the extraordinary depth of experience you all three have, it is a perfect blend for the conversations we're having right now in the workforce, particularly around fostering culture and hiring employees, which is increasingly challenged. Not only the shortage in skilled labor, but also creating a culture where people want to stay, especially because what people want in a culture has changed. So I want to ask Alfred a little bit about that. Why do you think it's important for manufacturers to really understand their employees' skills and their goals? And how do you think that should influence their approach to continuous learning?
I love that question, Cassie, and I think the short answer to it is really alignment with company goals and objectives. When we take the opportunity to first understand what are the company goals and objectives, and then identify what skills and capabilities that are needed to achieve those goals, and assess then our people to see what skills they have, we can then identify whether or not we have any what I call performance gaps that may be preventing us from being able to achieve those goals. By the same token, when people have personal goals and objectives, we can also see if there are gaps. When we do that and we align those gaps with company goals and objectives, we now have some tangible things that we can take to our finance group to say, hey, here's why we need to invest in our people. If we're to obtain these goals, our people need development in these gaps that will help us achieve our objectives. The other side of it is when it gets time to talent recruitment and talent acquisition, if we don't have that talent inside, we can take it to that group and say, hey, here are the skills that we need to recruit into the organization. So we're not just recruiting bodies, we're recruiting skills and talents and people with the capabilities to help us achieve our goals.
I love that answer because what I see when I watch you work, Alfred, is that you're very good at tying these really powerful skills that breed a wonderful culture in a company to the bottom line and helping senior leadership understand their tangible financial value to the company. So that's a great answer. Well, Beth, I want to ask you about this. So Cascade, describe a little bit about your employees. I know that you talked about them being your most valuable asset. How do you think that perspective influences your culture and your teamwork? And has it always been that way? Did you have to create a mentality shift, or were you just in a magical paradise from day one at Cascade, Beth?
Well, I'd say it probably wasn't a magical paradise in the beginning, but I'll start out with a quote that really follows up those good questions. It's from our founder, and it was at our 50th anniversary in Cascade in 1993. And he basically said there's two challenges facing any company, small or large, and we have to satisfy customers and satisfy employees. And it took a long time to reduce it to those two simple truths. So our facility started in 1980 here. Our company started in the 40s. Specifically here, we're multi-generational. We have about 20% of our employees have been here 20 to 45 years. but 52% have been here less than 6 years. So we've got young folks and different generations across the board. So that's really where our challenges face. A couple of the contributions that have influenced that is, one, we have a really good employee referral program. It's very generous. So we ask employees to refer those that they know that they would like to work with every day. And then if those candidates are selected and they're here for 6 months, then they do get a nice bonus for that. Another way, it really starts with the beginning of how we communicate from a candidate on up through training, making sure that we continually improve the process with how we do our interviews, our hiring, our onboarding. And we just even recently just changed to being able to communicate through, the channels people use. If you're using one of the media sites for posting jobs, a lot of them have the way to text through there before you're getting their contact information. And I find that in this world where people don't like to answer their phone from those they don't know, texting and emails are really the initial way to get started on that.
There's so much I could talk to you about, Beth, with that answer. That's such a great quote. And it reminds me of a quote my first CEO told me when I became a hiring manager. She said, hire like you'll end up on a desert island with your team. And I think that it sounds like you've done that, because having multi-generational is so rare in that legacy in Georgia. It's a powerful example for all of us. So thank you for sharing that, Beth.
Sure.
So Brandon, close us out on this culture piece. The RPM program is a public-private partnership with the Richmond County School System. Can you describe it for our audience who is not familiar with it, doesn't know what that stands for, and how did Textron develop this program in the first place?
Yes, ma'am. So the RPM program, RPM is short for Reaching Potential Through Manufacturing. It was founded 10 years ago. We're celebrating our 10th anniversary this year. It is a public-private partnership, as you said, between the Richmond County School System and Textron Specialized Vehicles, where we take the kids who are most at risk of not completing their high school education. They're behind academically. There are usually a number of reasons behind that as you peel back the onion. Some of them have very difficult home situations that they're dealing with, personal circumstances that are keeping them from advancing in their education as they should. And so we take those kids as ranked by the school system, and we invite them to be part of this program where they're able to go through intensive instruction to catch up in their academic studies, but also work part-time as an employee for Textron Specialized Vehicles, assembling subcomponents for our vehicles, things like headlights, taillights, steering components, forward neutral reverse transmission cables, and the like. And so they literally go to school for 4 hours a day in the same facility where they also work as an employee and manufacturer for us. So there are classrooms on one side of the building and a manufacturing floor on the other side of the building. And when they're done with their shift in school, they go over, they walk across the building and begin working for us. We really started this program because 10 years ago when we were founding it, we were going through an expansion. We were looking to expand our operations here in Augusta. And we realized that it wasn't just having the capital to do that. We were going to need the workforce to support that expansion. And at that time, unfortunately, the Richmond County School System's graduation rate was challenged. And so thankfully, we had a model program here in Georgia that Southwire Corporation does with the Carroll County School System called 12 for Life. That we were able to take and repurpose here in Richmond County with our local school system to create a program that can both help those kids who are most in need to get back on track and complete their high school education, and also, frankly, provide a pipeline of skilled and well-trained and vetted talent into our company.
That is such a powerful example, Brandon. I feel like we should do another webinar on this exact conversation about how we've talked so much about the challenges in workforce pipeline, but we often start around the machinist level or something at the work level. And I love that you've started further back and you've gone to the root of the problem. And it's both helping the community, so you're building that trust, and then also creating a powerful pipeline for work. So that is a fantastic example. Now, we've talked, thank you. We've talked about bringing people on, but what about developing them? I want to ease us into thinking about this full life cycle. Beth, Cascade, I know, emphasizes this self-directed management style. How does that really translate, though, in day to day? How do people self-manage?
It's a really good question. I think that there's a couple of things that we do, and one of those is employee involvement is a way of life. Our teams are encouraged to continually evaluate processes and recommend changes to improve efficiency, safety, and quality. Just to give an example, our teams meet at the beginning and the end of the shifts. They're reviewing schedules. At the end of the shift, they're actually evaluating how did they miss production, what caused it, and we're tracking that through the month. Then, to follow that up, every morning our managers then meet with the team leaders, and we're given a little bit more information regarding um, discussing those issues so that we're modifying and learning what the trends are, addressing any safety that comes up right away, and just that responsiveness. And then eventually, if there are projects that evolve from that, then our teams are involved in implementing any ideas that come through that process.
I feel like my colleague Alfred Gardner is probably internally clapping when he hears this because we talk a lot about having a constant feedback loop in companies because it's so hard to solicit feedback when it's not a part of the culture to constantly be sharing it. And it's a two-way street. People often perceive feedback as only from management, but we have to have our employee feedback. So I love that you've modeled that so beautifully for the group. So, Brandon, what makes that RPM program that you talked about successful for students who may not be thriving in traditional settings? I'm sure everybody's seen the data that there's an increasing loss of talent going through university systems, college systems. They're falling out of the system more frequently than previous generations. So how do you think this helps solve that failure to thrive?
Well, what we found through working with the kids in the RPM program now for 10 years is that in many cases, these kids just need a little confidence.
Mm.
Many of these kids are coming from very difficult circumstances. They may be coming out of poverty. They may be in difficult home situations. They may be even homeless in some cases. And so uh, a lot of these kids just they lack self-confidence. They lack the belief in themselves that they can accomplish things. And so when you bring them into a manufacturing environment and you teach them how to build a transmission cable or how to assemble a headlight assembly or how to assemble an electronic controller for a golf car, and they learn how to do that and they see the fruit of their work and the fruit of their labor, and they see that those parts that they build go directly down the street to our main factory and go directly into the products that we ship all over the world to our customers. That gives them that sense of accomplishment and self-confidence that they need, not just to succeed on the manufacturing floor, but to achieve in the classroom and to begin to excel in the other parts of their life. And really, it sounds overly simple, I think, unfortunately, but it really is. Sometimes they just need that little push. They need that opportunity to gain self-confidence and to believe in themselves. And that's the nudge. That's what it takes to get them back on track and get them to completing high school and moving on to whether they move into the workforce, whether they go into college, whether they go into technical school, whatever the case might be. It gets them back on track to go get back on to graduate from high school and move on to become a more productive member of society.
I love that pride of ownership. It harkens back to earlier days in early American manufacturing when no matter where you were in the world, you could proudly point out something that was American made. And it makes me think of that culture of pride in your work. Alfred, I'm sure you have so much to say about both Beth's comments and Brandon's. So you've helped people reskill and retrain. Can you share some examples of how it's impacted employees and the companies as a whole?
Yes, I can share a story, and I'll change the names to protect the innocent there. But I'll say a guy named Larry. If you were to call the Human Resources Office and say, I want to verify employment on Larry, what position does he hold? We would tell you he was an assembler. But Larry was really what we would call a force multiplier, which meant he was an assembler on paper, but Larry was also reskilled and upskilled to run a furnace chain, to be a machine operator, to be a projection welder. And he got paid extra money for doing those jobs. So it was extra money in his pocket. I've also worked at a place to where there was more flex up and flex back. So when we hired people, we told people, you're going to be hired in to do X, but we're also going to train you to flex up and flex back along that assembly line. And what that does for people, it helps them with engagement. They don't have to worry about being in a routine task where they do the same thing every day. It also gave the organization what we call some flexibility, some change agility, because in manufacturing, sometimes things change, schedule change, lines go down, but you had people that had these multiple skills that they just move with the flow and flow throughout the organization.
I thought you were going to use one of our DDI examples, Alfred, changing the names to our DDI characters. Alfred Gardner and I train DDI leadership skills together, and he has favorite characters in our DDI training. So I was expecting that, Alfred. I think that's a great segue for us to start thinking about retaining employees. So we've started our pipeline by thinking about how we foster and how we hire. And then we've thought a little bit about what development looks like on a day-to-day. But now a crucial part of this piece is retention. I know Beth is going to have a lot to say on this one because they've already exemplified retention, multi-generational, but it's certainly a challenge here in Georgia. So Beth, what does Cascade offer that creates that cross-training and the flexibility so that you're able to have that multi-generational talent?
Sure. So it's really important to provide a place to work that provides opportunities to grow in knowledge and in contribution. And each of our teams focuses on a part of the production process. Teams are customers to each other until we get to the end result. So they rely on everyone within the organization, but team by team to reach our focal goal, which is to be a preferred supplier by delivering those exceptional quality products on time. And so a couple of the examples would be as the way our pay system is developed. So employees come in, they're starting out, they're learning maybe one work area or work cell, and then they're progressing by levels by adding and mastering skills and their job rotating and things of that nature. And so our pay system is actually built to encourage individuals to gain that additional training, to become flexible, to move to the highest level within the pay structure. They actually have to meet certain criteria. They have to have so many skills that they have been able to perform efficiently, effectively, and safely. They have to meet some educational criteria, as well as be able to provide some examples of what they've done already as a team member that provided troubleshooting and continual improvement. So what that does, it allows the employee to have career growth, financial growth, and job satisfaction. But it also allows the company flexibility to move between multiple teams to cover increases in production. But also it helps with that unplanned labor shortage for absenteeism, because absenteeism is a big impact to us all. So that job flexibility and cross training really not only help the employee, but the company as well.
You said something really powerful there when you said teams are customers to each other. Can you explain that a little bit? I'm so curious.
Sure. So our teams are set up so that it's start to finish of our process. So we have a saw and machining team. They take our raw materials, they're cutting that down, and that's feeding to another part of the plant to do their part, whether it be welding or machine centers. We also have a couple of sub-assembly areas where they're making specific parts that also go to the final process. So instead of everything kind of going to quality as it comes to the new area, it's being quality checked and then it's moving on to another process in the manufacturing side. It then ends up on our final assembly area and then goes into shipping so that we produce. So the things that we're making are literally being made and shipped within the same day or week that they're made.
Wow.
So we don't stock to the floor. So it's very important that we keep that process moving.
That is incredible. And when you said that, I thought about the mental shift that must do to the culture to think of your colleague as a customer. It must completely change the way that you interact with them, the way that you speak with them, and the way you think about the longevity of the relationship. So that's such a profound example. Now, Brandon, what do you think about behavior skills? In the RPM program graduates, I know that they probably stand out compared to those traditional entry-level hires because they have that, as you mentioned, not only the skills, but they've been given the confidence and they've been given this sense of ownership. How do you think that their behavior stands out amongst other graduates?
Well, I think what we see with our RPM graduates is when they come to work for us, and we do offer, you know, the majority of the RPM graduates of the RPM program full-time employment opportunities with our company in the manufacturing environment. When they come to us, they are already familiar with, they know our culture and they know what our expectations are. And we've provided them with soft skills education in addition to academic education as they've gone through the program. So we've taught them the importance of dressing appropriately for work, showing up on time, how to handle conflict in the workplace. And they've experienced that themselves in a real work environment. And so when they come to us, they are very familiar with the company. They're familiar with our product. They're familiar with our manufacturing environment. They're familiar with our culture, and it really does help them be sticky, if you will, with in their employment with us, and really kind of gives them a leg up if they apply themselves to advance quickly in their career and move on to new opportunities with the company. We've had RPM graduates who are now full-time welders on our workforce. We have RPM graduates who are line leaders on our assembly lines. We have RPM graduates who have gone on to college and gotten engineering degrees and now are working with us as engineers designing the next generation of E-Z-GO golf cars and Cushman utility vehicles. So it really, that experience and that knowledge of our culture and our expectations really puts them over the top.
That made me think of something that my colleague Alfred talks about a lot, which is the challenges of intergenerational hiring. And when you talk about those soft skills, the generation that's coming up, they often talk about a lack of confidence when it comes to communicating with senior leaders or confidence about how to present themselves. And they didn't have the same mentorship that generations before had. So I love that you're filling that gap and allowing them to, as you said, not only thrive when they're working for your company, but thrive in whatever capacity they are in at the moment. So that is a powerful thing. Beth, going back to you a little bit, I want to ask one more question about Cascade. You talked about those competitive benefits and all of those incredible development opportunities. What have you found employees value the most? And how do you think that supports retention? What's the feedback you're hearing?
Sure. So we, of course, continue to strive in that employment development. And at our plant, we have really grown in numbers. When we started in the 80s, we had 35 employees. We now are approaching 90. So you're adding a lot of people as you continue to grow and have those generations. But in that, one of the nice things that we have is that those individuals who have been here for long term have literally had the opportunities and are now in leadership roles. So when you speak to our team leaders and our managers, they've actually started out in the same place as the folks we're trying to hire. And so it shows that there truly is promotion from within in the organization. So that is one way that we do that. And then those employees actually took advantage of tuition reimbursement to gain their bachelor's degree or their master's degree, which were requirements for those roles. But then there can also be those roles where it's other types of source training that we identify. So we're helping our maintenance technicians gain more skills related to the certain things that they may need with the new equipment that's being brought in. I would say that like many of our companies, we do have skills gaps like you were mentioning, and that many that move to that leadership roles and the addition of having 52% of the workforce be less than 6 years of employment, we really have a place where we've got to focus on how do we groom those people, train those individuals so they can fill those positions as the current newly promoted folks, move forward in their careers as well. And I think really to avoid one of the worst things that we can do is to identify that this is someone that we would like to see in a different role. And if it's not the role that the individual is really seeking as part of their own personal career growth, then you've wasted time and money in something that won't be successful. So we actually implemented this year to where we're starting to initiate career conversations. So our managers are learning more about employees, what their desires are. It's not a mandatory thing. So we started out small. We probably have about 15 employees that shared what they would like to do. So their managers will be meeting with them, kind of discussing where the gap of understanding is from what the employee thinks it takes to get into those new roles versus what actually is required. So that will help as they grow and develop. It also helps our managers and us as well. So when we do succession planning, we're tapping into the right talent and we're spending our efforts where employees want to go.
You dropped so many gems. I know as a millennial, as soon as you said tuition reimbursement, I was like, ooh, music to my ears, Beth. But I also love that you're talking about bridging the gap because just like Brandon's work is helping to bridge that gap for our Gen Z or our later millennials, it sounds like you're also internally thinking about when we lose the generation that was really a founding employee, how do we make sure there's a transfer of all of those skills that made them such a great employee to the next generation? So I love that idea of career conversations and that they're informal without pressure and they can just be straightforward conversations. So those are a lot of strategies. And I will tell our audience, I know you're probably shocked by this, we're already halfway through. So we've enjoyed ourselves so much that I want you to start thinking about your questions for this incredible group. Because when we get to the Q&A, I don't want you to miss out on the opportunity to ask these skilled partners your questions. So while we're talking about those strategies, I want to pivot us back to my colleague Alfred. You've heard what Brandon and Beth have talked to us about, but what are some other underutilized partnerships or resources that you want to recommend to manufacturers who really should leverage employee development and training to take their company to the next level?
Yes, one of the more underutilized areas that I think is when we look at our local school government officials and local trade schools, I think there's an opportunity there for us to really partner with them, especially those local officials to partner to say, hey, here's some of the skills and talent and resources that we need to build within our own community. Talk with those at the local vocational trade schools, let them know which skills are missing. Because throughout history, we had a gap to where one time within our educational system, we prepared students to be able to leave high school and go work into manufacturing for those that did not want to go to college. We took those programs out and now we have a void because not every kid is mature enough or ready enough for college and they're in limbo and they don't have those skills. So I think if we partner with our local officials, let them know, work with any trade schools that's in your area, let them know what skills and stuff that you desire and that you need, that they will help you. Another resource that I've used in the past was when we were in fear of losing some employees to a much larger employer, there are sometimes some state funds and federal funds that are out there that will actually reimburse you some of your training costs as you hire people on. Yes, you have to go through the paperwork, but it is worth it because you're going to have to replace those individuals anyway. So why not take the time to fill out that paperwork, get reimbursed those funds, and then you can take those funds and actually repurpose them in your organization as well to continue to develop your employees.
My economic developer ears perked up when you said that, Alfred, because it's so true that here in Georgia, there are so many resources that people don't know about, that their tax dollars have already paid for. Much of our time even has been supported through taxpayer funding. And I always tell our clients, start with the free things first. Because all of those resources you described, Alfred, those are very valuable. And a private company will charge quite a bit of money to scout them and find them. And when you start with your local Chamber of Commerce, your state government, your local MEP, those resources can come to you and reduce that bottom line so you have more money to invest back in your employees. So thank you for sharing that tip. Brandon, what about you? How do you think manufacturers who don't have the resources to develop something like RPM program can still build a talent pipeline within their own company?
Well, I think Alfred stole a little bit of my thunder, but I think the first place that I would point them is to their local school systems. They're in the local technical colleges. It doesn't matter where I am, frankly, in Georgia or even in the country. When I talk to CTAE directors, when I talk to teachers, when I talk to college and career academies, they are all hungry for opportunities to get their students out in manufacturing environments, exposed to careers in manufacturing, and give them an opportunity to learn about the possibilities and opportunities that exist once they finish their studies in manufacturing organizations. And so you don't have to take on a 100-student program, create a 100-student program out of thin air necessarily, like we did here in Augusta. You can start with 2 or 3 students. You can start at a much smaller scale. You can look for opportunities, but plant tours, whatever the case might be. You simply have to be out in front of those kids and give them the opportunity to learn what they can achieve in manufacturing and what a viable career and lucrative career path it can be for them. And then I think, as Beth spoke to earlier, you have to provide people with opportunities to grow within your company. If they don't feel like they're developing where they are, they're going to find somewhere where they have that opportunity. So you have to provide, what be it tuition reimbursement programs, be it work on the job learning programs, be it mentorship programs, whatever the case might be. Once they're within your doors, once they're at your facility, once they're on your payroll, you have to give them those opportunities to develop and grow, because really everybody wants to do that, and everybody has different pathways to get where they want to be. And so you have to be willing to have those conversations with employees about where do you want to go, and here's how we can get you there. Here's what you need to do, and here's what we can provide for you to help you do that. And I think those sound maybe like simple things to do. They're harder things to do in practice, but they're vitally important to not only attracting but retaining a workforce.
I love that you say it's a simple solution, but there's a phrase, simplicity is genius. And oftentimes we overlook that the simplest changes are often the ones that have the most sustainability over time. And something that's powerful about what you replied with is, due to the pace of life, we've become increasingly siloed, especially in manufacturing, because the workload of every individual has increased so much that we often don't take that extra step to be curious about what our local university system is doing, what our local, even before university, as you've done with high schools and even elementary schools, what is their exposure to manufacturing? Invite them in for career days, find talent that way. I'm sure there are teachers in your local community that would be thrilled for you to ask what students have aptitude that they could send in your direction. So I love that you're reminding us that oftentimes the simplest answer is the most sustainable one. So we're going into my favorite part of this section, which is the ability for all of us to talk together. So I'm going to ask a few questions, and I'd like any of you that's comfortable to answer it. And please feel free to bounce off of one another. The first question I want to ask you all is, where should manufacturers focus right now? I mentioned that there's just such a barrage of needs. The pace of life has become so fast that our focus is being pulled in so many directions. So what do you think is the most bang for your buck right now? Hiring, upskilling, retaining talent? Is it all three? And why do you think that? And please feel free to jump in.
Well, I like to say that it really depends on that organization. Each organization is not in the same place. If you're having trouble hiring and recruiting, that's where you start. If that's not your issue, and if you know that you're about to change some processes, put in some new equipment, then you want to start with upskilling people to prepare them in advance. The mistake that I think we often make is everybody tries to do the same thing somebody else does. But you have to do like Textron and like Cascade is doing. They're assessing and getting information from their people. Your people will tell you where you need to start, but you have to start gathering that information and gathering that data and put it into practice. And that begins with shaping that culture.
I love that. I love that. You've got to tailor it. You've got to know what your solution is focused on, because it could be a brilliant solution for someone else. Brandon, Beth, do you have anything to add to that one?
Sure. I was going to say that upskilling and retraining the current workforce really should be a top priority. Work methods change, equipment changes all the time, a lot of times to become more effective and efficient. As our equipment is aged out, new equipment requires a different set of skills. So you really want to make sure that you're in tap with providing that information to employees so that when the changeovers happen, they're ready and prepared. Another side of that is as business growth increases, kind of what Alfred was saying about knowing where your situation is. So if your business is growing, maybe you're changing the types of products that you have, then you're really going to need to look at where that additional workforce is going to need to be. And then also to reevaluate and rethink even your minimum qualifications that you have. I know we've had to do that because the generations today didn't necessarily grow up tinkering with lawnmowers or changing their own oil. So we had to backpedal and say, hey, you know what? They're not coming in with these basic skills of knowing what are tools and how do you use them. So we've had to accept that that was the situation and then build into that training to understand that they're not coming in the same place as maybe past generations did.
It's really wise to benchmark it against what the general is for the generation instead of what your expectation is. I have another question for the group. What's one mistake your company has made or that you've seen another manufacturer make that you're trying when they're trying to solve these workforce challenges that you think could be easily corrected with a different perspective?
A common mistake is we always look to human resources to help us with our workforce challenges. Common mistake is people say human resources is for the people, human resources is the business partner. I see posts on LinkedIn all the time to where there's this dialogue that, oh, as HR professionals, we need to just be business minded. And then there's some come in, no, we need to think about the people. But we have to be able to walk, chew gum at the same time. And then when that flavor of that gum goes out, we got to still be able to walk, reach in our purse or our pocket, pull out another piece of gum and keep walking. There should not be a this or that choice. We have to be both. We have to be both. And the thing that the mistake that companies make is we tend to treat people when it comes to the financials as waste or cost. But we're forgetting the fact that if you look at today's market value, 85 to 90% of that is based on intangible assets. What are intangible assets? They're your intellectual property. They're your brand. There are your customer satisfaction, things that get out there. Those are intangible assets that add value. And when we let those people go, we're letting 85 to 90% of that value walk away. We have to start treating people and investment in people the same way we look at capital and assets that we see on the books. Yes, people are not necessarily assets in the legal sense, but the knowledge that they bring, their innovation, their creativity, the relationships that they bring, those are intangible assets that we have to hold on to. So we have to rethink how we think about people.
I love that, Alfred. And Alfred, I've heard you say many times that people often wait until it's an HR problem instead of seeing frontline managers as people who are gathering information and partnering with HR constantly. Brandon, did you have something to add?
I was just going to say that I think one place that many companies, not just manufacturing companies, but many companies stub their toe is leadership development. I think your leaders are really the people who define your culture and who demonstrate your culture and what it takes to be successful and what it takes for the company to be successful to your workforce day in and day out. And too often, I think companies fall into the trap of, I have a very talented employee who deserves that opportunity. And so they get promoted into a leadership position, but we don't provide them the training and support that they need to actually be a successful leader. They go from one day, they're an assembler out on the floor. The next day, they're leading a team of 5 or 10 assemblers out on the floor. And that requires a very different skill set, a very different viewpoint, a very different base of operations from which to work. And we just don't do enough to prepare leaders to lead. And I think that is one of the biggest problems that companies face. And quite frankly, one of the biggest drivers of turnover and morale issues in the workplace is not equipping your frontline leaders with the knowledge and the resources they need to be successful and to represent the company culture well.
Couldn't have said it better myself, Brandon. I often say that as a person who was promoted very quickly to a people manager, the skill that got me promoted was not the skill that I had to use to become a manager. The skill of constantly being able to produce as a single performer is very different than the cultural skill that Beth was talking about gathering feedback and taking time to listen and slowing the pace down to teach. It's a very different toggle between the brain. And I think you're absolutely right that it extends beyond manufacturing. This is a cultural problem we see in many companies that they could learn from and use as an ability to jumpstart a culture of retention. So I'm going to wrap us up on this section a little bit and have one final question for the group. If manufacturers have a limited budget and time, which most people have limited time, talent, and resources, what workforce investments could they prioritize first to really jumpstart their progress forward?
Well, I'll start us off. I was going to say, when we find that when production is in a lull, which is typically when we have fewer budget dollars to spend on those other things, one of the things I think people are quick to do, kind of what Alfred mentioned a while ago, is we look at people, that's a cost, so let's lower how many headcount we have. Rather than doing that, it's really better for us if we say, let's take this time to shore up our training. Let's start the cross training. If we now are down in a department where, we only need to have three people and we have 5, maybe those other 2 are shifted to another department to start shadowing in another area. And then really the other part of that is reevaluating your processes, like your workflow, your material management, machine capacities, and functionality, so that when the new products come on board or when the production demands increase, people are ready, and we can quickly adapt to the new capacity requirements.
I love that. That's my takeaway, Beth. You've summarized my takeaway from this webinar today. Brandon, Alfred, do you have something to add to that?
Yeah, I would say too, just to add to that, it goes back to once you understand your goals and objectives and the skills that are needed, and you know what timelines that you have for those business objectives, identify where you have that gaps in where your people are in order to meet those objectives. Once you identify those gaps and look at your timeline for your objectives and the goals there, that can drive you to say, hey, I need to start here. The only exception would be to that if you are taking cultural surveys and people are sending you messages and stuff that, hey, it's a problem for retention
Yeah.
in this area, then you need to let that drive you. But you got to get the pulse of your organization to kind of help you out there.
I love that. I love that. And Alfred, I'm going to piggyback on that. You've talked a little bit about this before, but what separates manufacturers that successfully become that, as Beth said, the employer of choice, from those that are really struggling to get there?
I like the word employer of choice, but then also I'm going to borrow a phrase that Josh Bersin puts out. It's called being the irresistible organization. You want to be irresistible. You want to be the organization that when people come there to interview, they're not thinking about the other interview they had. They're saying, I want to be there. You want to be that type of organization that people are there. You're not worried about them leaving because they say, I want to be here. And I think there are 3 things that separate that. One is culture. A lot of times we focus on employee engagement, but think about it. You can have an engagement event on Thursday and Friday, but when Sunday comes and that person is worried about going to work on Monday, something is wrong with your culture. We have to realize that when it comes to culture, that's that underlying environment and values that actually influences those feelings that people have toward their employee engagement. And in order to address your culture, you have to realize that you have employees that are new coming in, you have employees that are mid-year, and you have employees that have been there a long time. So when you try to survey your culture, you have to make sure you have a mechanism to where you have surveys that captures the person from the time they interview with you, planning to get onboarding, what kept them there with you, all the way through exitry. So we need to have a diverse group of ways to get information to make sure that we target each person regardless of where they are in that employee life cycle. That second phase that I think that that separates companies, and Brandon touches on it, is leadership. Your leadership philosophy. We know that for today's workforce, manager says, employee does not work.
Mhm.
People now want to be involved. They want to be collaborative. They want to know what's affecting them. We have to have a leadership that's willing to take the time to tell people, hey, here's why we're doing what we're doing. Give that rationale, not just because I said it. Give that rationale. Have to have leadership that's willing to listen to employees, whether they agree with them or not. But listen to employees. Once you listen, you build that connection with people. You build that connection with people, you build trust. You build trust. So leadership philosophy is the second thing. The last thing that I think is really that investment in people. Are you treating people like they are your real competitive advantage? If 85 to 95% of today's market value is intangible assets created with people, are you treating them that way? You have to think about treating them that way. So when you look at your people, you need to recruit for talent density, making sure that you're not only recruiting for a person to complete a task that you need at the moment, but are you trying to recruit people that have skills and abilities or the willingness to learn other things as well so they can learn and grow? We talk about AI now, how people are scared of AI. We have the perfect opportunity now to not use AI to replace our people, but use AI to enhance our people's skills. Get people to use to here's how you use AI. Train them on how you interpret the data. Train them when they're looking at the data, being able to make predictive decisions is what's going to happen next in the process. Help improve those AI skills and those human skills. And the last thing I would say that makes a difference with them is change agility. And I think you get that from 4 R's that I'll borrow from Josh Bersin again. You want to recruit the right talent. You want to retain people by making sure that you have that engagement in their experience. You want to reskill people to where you create a dynamic workforce to where as things changing, you're reskilling people, you're multiplying their skills. And that last thing is that innovation is called that redesign. Because when you improve people's skills, allow their innovation to take place, they will change us from writing a job description to finding a person to fit the job description to get work. They would change that from, hey, we know what skills we need. We embed those skills in the individuals. Those individuals would then be innovative and really come up with ideas for us to change work for it to be better. And that's getting people involvement. And then again, that goes back to what type of culture are you building?
Thank you for sharing that, Alfred, because I love that it touches on through lines that I heard from both Brandon and Beth, because you have Brandon all the way starting at high school with that life cycle of movement. And then Beth really talked about retaining multi-generational talent by using those constant conversation feedback loops in different ways. So there's constant data for her to use about where employees are feeling the most pain points and where they're feeling the most joy in their work. And I will tell you all, time flies when you're having fun. So we've actually hit the point when we're about to go into Q&A. But I want to go off of something that Alfred said about resources and share a few resources with you. So while I'm pulling up those resources, if you have any questions for the group, please feel free to drop those in the chat. My colleagues will be looking at it. And then I'll talk you through, as Alfred mentioned, some resources you should be aware of that will help you to continue forward on your own path. With that in mind, we currently have a few things at MEP that I want to share. If you're not familiar with the Georgia Manufacturing Extension Partnership, we have been around since 1960. I like to say that we're Georgia's best kept resource, best kept secret resource, because very few people recognize the term MEP, but then they know the work we do from out in the community. So I'd love to share a little about it so you're familiar with it. We have 10 regional managers. They live and work in those areas. They're constantly investing. You can easily connect with one of them. Just simply email my colleague Amber and she'll make sure you get to the right person. The support that we provide is end to end. Something that I love about the work we do is within each of our specialties, you can find a support from the beginning of your business all the way through the life cycle, as Alfred said. Energy, human resources, sustainability, cybersecurity, safety, supply chain, you name it, we have a team that can help you with it. And specifically around those HR and leadership development skills, Alfred lives and breathes constant maturity assessments for companies, helping them understand legal compliance standards, and really tuning into that leadership development, making sure that your employees have those skills that they need to really succeed. If you want to stay part of this conversation, please don't hesitate to grab this QR code. The first one will help you to connect with our contact form. The second one will help you subscribe to our monthly newsletter, and you can stay in touch with us either way. And then, of course, before we go into those questions, I want to thank Beth Eno, Brandon Haddock, my colleague Alfred Gardner. This was such a wonderful way for me to spend my lunch hour, and I hope that you all enjoyed it as much as I did.